All right, before I get started, any questions from this last week? I guess from the last couple days. All right. All right, so has anyone used a web framework before?
React.
React, okay, cool. So what is a framework? Like, why is React a framework? How is it different than just?
Oh, it's a lot of it's about reusability and having lots of goodness baked into it, so you don't have to repeat things. You could reuse them and pass them around. You're not repeating yourself. You're not rewriting code. You've got a nav bar component. You can take it from this app and use it in this one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so you get a lot of reusability. There's kind of, so a framework like React is for, making front end web apps. And it's kind of, you could do everything from scratch yourself, right? You could do everything in vanilla JavaScript and CSS and HTML. And, with enough time, you could eventually come up with something like React. Maybe through, you work on stuff and you have a common set of problems. Every time you make a new website, you have this common set of problems. And so you follow the same patterns over and over again. And you start, formalizing these patterns. You'll write, okay, here's this function or here's this class that I can reuse everywhere. So I'm going to put it in a file. And then you can end up, well, if I just kind of put this all together officially in a package, then I can, everyone on my team can use it, and other people, I put it up on the internet on an NPM or wherever, and everyone can use it. So frameworks for, whether they're web frameworks or anything else, it's basically just a bunch of solved problems. So there's some domain and people have, been solving the same kind of problem over and over again, and they just have formalized it and they've developed a system. And
I think a lot of it is about real-time updates too. Like when your data changes, it'll update your front end and kind of in an efficient manner.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, things update quickly. With React, yeah, so React is dynamic, but even just from like a framework perspective, so Django is on version 4.0, React is on, I don't even know what it is now, 18 something. React changes very quickly. It gets updated often. All right, so Django is in some ways similar to React in that it's a framework for building web apps, but Django is a full stack web application. So let's see. Brian, can you tell me what a full stack web application is? Brian, you there?
Yeah, I was muted, of course, as always,
Okay,
talking
sure.
to myself.
Yeah, no worries.
A full stack setup is the front end, all the front end stuff that the users see. And in this case, we'd be working with HTML, CSS, the back end framework that powers everything, which in the case of Django would actually be the Python in the Django, and then whatever database system, which would also be in the back end.
Mm-hmm.
To supply it.
Exactly. So it does so you could have just like a static web page. So the alternative would be something like a static web page where you have, I'm going to serve up some HTML. This is like the early web, right? Here's my HTML document, and if you make a request to the server, here's the document you get, and it's the same for everyone basically. a full stack web application will introduce the main thing. The main thing introduces is a backend. So now you can pull data, you can save data, you can do CRUD, right? Create, read, update, and destroy. So you can, save information, you can display information, so different users can see different things and so on. And this is basically how the web works. So Django is a full stack web application, so it handles database interactions, it handles serving up HTML, and everything in between. So we're going to look at the overview. So I'm going to talk about Django. I don't really like doing this, but I'm going to talk about Django just in the abstract, even though you haven't seen it or used it. So I'll talk about the structure. You can just listen, and then we will start just by doing it in the next couple of weeks. We're going to do so much stuff that it won't matter. All right. So here's kind of a basic overview of the structure of Django at a high level. So you can think of Django as having 3 different components. So at the bottom we have this layer that interacts with the database, and it's called a model. So we've seen in some of the work we've done up until this point, where first off we started with raw SQL queries. And then we used was it Psycop G2, and we've done some stuff with the SQLite 3 standard library and the SQLite 3 module in the Python standard library. So the model layer is the Python, Django's Python abstraction that's going to interact with the database. So we have this layer. At the top, we have the client side, and that's the template. So the templating engine, we saw Jinja on Monday. That's one templating engine. This is basically the HTML, essentially. So this is what the client is ultimately going to get. So at the top, we have our HTML, whatever we're serving to the client. And then in the middle is what is in Django is called a view. And the view is basically the main logic. So there's actually kind of like an intermediate layer here, which is like a router. And the view will handle all of it's like the handler functions that we saw in the challenge on Saturday. So if I go to, example.com/users, and I make a post request because I want to add a new user, then that request would come in and it would get handed off to the users view, and the users view would execute whatever logic, business logic it does. It would check the request, it would see if it meets certain conditions, and then it might make a request to the database using this model, and then get information back, and then do some more processing, and then ultimately serve up some HTML through the template. So here's another diagram that's going to show this process. So I'm a Django client or user. Through the browser, I make a request. This URL is .py, which we'll see. This is part of Django. This is basically the router. So this is the part of the application which is just going to check the request and see, like, where are you going? Like, where do you want to go? Are you going to /users or blog or /photos or whatever? So the browser is going to make a request. This URL is .py. This router is going to look at the request, and it's going to hand off that request to the relevant view. And views.py is going to have a bunch of functions or classes that are going to handle those different routes. And then once in the view, it's going to execute its logic. Excuse me. execute its logic, and probably it's going to have some kind of interaction with the database, which it's going to use this model layer for. And that's going to get information back. And then once it has like the final thing that it wants to serve up, it's gonna take that information and feed it to the templating engine, which is basically mostly Jinja 2 in the case of Django. And once it has that final HTML document, it's going to serve it back up to the client. So that's the basic process. And today we're going to be focusing on the model layer. Okay, are there any questions so far?
You said the model layer, is it fair to say that it's like dealing with SQL queries?
Yeah, basically. So it's the so we saw with like Psycop G2 that it's a way to do SQL using Python. So you have a program that you write in Python, and I want to inside my Python program, I want to have some kind of database interaction. I want to make requests to the database. I want to get information back. And when I get that information back from my database, I want it to be, a Python object. I want it to be something that Python can use, so I can use it in the rest of my application. So we'll see how Django does it. It's a little bit more abstract than that. So we're not really writing SQL at all. We're actually going to create classes. So we'll create classes and those classes will basically be transformed into tables.
Okay,
So
cool.
we'll see what that looks like. Okay, so the Django documentation is very good. Anytime you talk about documentation, you are talking about a range of quality, and Django is, at the top. So the documentation is really good. It's very thorough. There's good tutorials and everything. So appreciate that. And you can see that, so there's lots of different, in some ways there's maybe too much information, but so here are these three layers. So there's the model layer, the view layer, and the template layer. So template layer is going to be what actually gets presented. So the model layer is what we're going to focus on for the next couple of days, and we can take a look at all these things. So it's going to talk about how to make a model, how to make a table basically, and then how to make queries and so on. So we're not going to go into everything, but we're going to talk today about creating tables in the database through this abstraction, and then making queries. Okay, so I'm going to follow the README for today now. So as you're doing this, if you have issues, especially if you're an M1, if you have issues with anything, just let me know and we'll figure it out. May need to play around with different versions of things. Okay, so I'm going to create a virtual environment. All right, and then I'm going to activate it. And then I'm going to install Django. So pip. Okay, so now I've installed Django. And so Django, Django is a is a framework, which means that it's been kind of built up over the years to solve particular sets of problems and to solve those problems in a specific kind of way. So Django, if you just kind of like read the source code or whatever, if you just kind of look at it, it just looks like this huge monster. But once you start using it, and once you start building a couple apps or a couple projects, you'll see that there's a real pattern. I mean, it's almost like practicing like a kata or something. Like you do this, then that, and then do this, and then that, do that. So if you do it a couple times, it just becomes, you'll see what it looks like. But there's definitely a particular way of doing things that kind of, Django wants you to do it in a particular kind of way. And so just like git or npm init, Django, you'll run this first command when you want to start a project, and it's going to create a whole bunch of boilerplate for you. So we're going to execute this command, Django admin start project, and then the project name, which will be, I think, students or school. So because we've installed Django, we have access to this Django admin start project school. So I execute that command, and here I'm going to get a whole bunch of stuff. So in this school, this larger school directory, there's another directory of the same name, which is going to have everything for my project. And before we talk about that, let me show you kind of what a project looks like. So there's some Django specific terminology. So there's something called a project, which is going to be, it's the top level thing that you're doing. And within a project, you can have different apps. So Django calls, for example, some portion of a project an app, which could be a little bit confusing. And so the analogy here is, like Amazon.com or whatever would be the project. So Amazon is the project, and within the project, there's a whole bunch of different apps. So these are like subcomponents. So you have, a billing app, you have an orders app, you have an authentication app, you have whatever, the shopping cart app. So you have all these different components that would be called apps in Django, and those are all subcomponents under a project. So we've got our project here and the project level. So this is all the top level stuff that we're going to get. And there are two, you don't need to worry about the ASGI and the like whiskey, ASCII, whatever. This is just kind of server stuff. You shouldn't need to worry about it. The two things we're going to care about are going to be the URLs. This is going to be kind of basically our router. We'll talk more about this later. And then the settings, which is going to have all of the defaults and everything else that we're going to need in our projects. There's a lot of stuff here. Most of it you don't need to really worry about, but occasionally you'll need to add something or modify something in here. Okay, and then this manage.py, this is like the, it's the command line utility. So we'll see, we'll end up invoking this pretty frequently to do things. All right, so we have we ran Django admin start project and then the name of the project. So we have the school project. And let's go ahead and create a database. I'll cd into school. Okay, I'm going to create a database. Okay. And then, so by default, Django will use SQLite. And if we look by the way, you should never need to do anything with the manage.py. So, so if we go into settings, we can see, we scroll down. Right here, we have this databases configuration. So by default, it's going to use SQLite 3, which is fine. It will work, and I'll probably use that most of the time when I'm doing examples. But if you want to deploy this, on a server somewhere, it's better to use a database that scales better. So we'll use Postgres. So in order to do that, there's an additional dependency if we want to use Postgres. So we're gonna pip install scikit-2, which we've already used before. Okay, and then we're gonna change the configuration. So we're gonna tell our app that we're gonna use a different database now. So we're gonna use PostgreSQL, and the database name is school. Okay, so we have our project now, which is school, and a project is going to have one or more apps in it. So we're going to create an app called attendance to keep track of students and attendance. So I'll paste this in here. So Python manage.py. So again, we're invoking this command line utility right here that we never need to really look at or change, but we'll be using it. And then start app, which is going to be a command. So start app is similar to start project. It's going to create an app, and it's going to create all of the boilerplate that we need. And the app's name is attendance. So we run that, and we can see I ran that while it was inside of this school. So even though these are on the same level, this school is really like a top level component. So this school is all of the kind of global settings for the entire project. And then attendance is the specific app. And we can see that what's in here is a little bit different. So I'll just briefly go over all of these, but we're not going to worry about most of these right now. Since we're just going to focus on the models. So views, here's where all of the basic business logic is going to go. So a request will come in. It will first hit this router basically. So it's going to look for a particular. So you're going to go to /admin, and then you can add other routes here. So it's going to check this here. It can hand it off further, and then eventually an appropriate view is going to get called, which you'll have to write. And then we have our tests, self-explanatory. We have models. So models, which is what we're going to use. So this is where we'll write classes that will represent tables in our database. And you don't need to worry about apps and admin right now. We also have this migrations folder, which we'll see what that does in a second. Okay. So there's a lot of things going on, but I promise you that once you do it a few times, it'll just become kind of a rote. Okay, so one thing you have to do is, so we've created a new app, but our project doesn't really know about it. So our project by default won't know that we've created this attendance app. So we have to explicitly tell it. So we have to go into settings, and under this installed apps configuration, we have to add our app to this list. So we're going to do attendance. So these other apps are things that Django gives you for free automatically. So there's an admin app, an authentication app, session, and so on. So there's all these other apps, which right now you don't need to worry about at all, but this is part of the, Django exists to solve a whole bunch of problems, so you don't have to do all this stuff from scratch. So Django is all these little apps, kind of like mini applications, come pre-written and imported. So they're available to use right off the bat. Okay, so we added our new attendance app, and we told our project about it by adding it to the installed apps and settings.py. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to create a model. So we're going to go into our app, which is attendance. You go into models, and we're going to add this. So this student class is basically going to end up as the student table. And this name field, this class attribute, it is going to be a column. So you can think of this as a student table with a name column and an email column. And the way it works is you will import models from django.db.models, and then you'll inherit from this model class. We can actually go look at it. So here is the source code for this model. And there's a lot of things in here which we don't need to worry about, but we're going to get all this stuff, just for free. And all we, 90% of the time, you just need to worry about this. You just create columns and you tell it, this is like, varchar 200. So we're going to create a field, and there's a character field. There's all kinds of other ones. We can look at the documentation. Field types. Let's see. Okay, so there are all these potential fields. You can have like types of data. So it could be integer. These are auto fields. You don't need to worry about that. So big integer, binary, Boolean, character, date. There's URLs. So there's a whole bunch of these, and these will get translated basically into appropriate SQL types. Okay, so depending on what type of data you want, you'll just kind of note that here. You can look at the documentation and then figure out what's available and what you need. Some of them will have, so this is actually a required parameter. So you have to have a max length for a car field. Others don't, others will have different ones. Okay. So I'll stop for a second. Are there questions so far?
So I understand the student class is going to be like the table, as an analogy, and then so what is attendance in that analogy?
So attendance would be like, so if I have, let's say, a web application for a school, for an entire school, I might want to have different kinds of so I might want to have like a class tracker. So that's a specific kind of functionality that's part of my school web application. So I can click on the nav bar and go to class tracker. I can click on the nav bar and go to attendance. And I go to attendance and I get redirected to a new page, and it presents me with I can fill out attendance, I can check attendance reports, I can do whatever. So attendance is some kind of modular or modularizable functionality that would exist within a larger web application.
Got it. So not necessarily dealing with like the database specifically, but just a way to redirect within the app.
Yeah, so this attendance would be like an individual component, and I could actually reuse this attendance component So let's say I have a school web app, and then I make another one, which is like, I don't know, a movie theater app. Sorry, this is not a good example, but so I want to track attendance for, so I could actually just like copy paste this and move it over into my movie theater web app if they, if it's appropriate. So one of the benefits of using a framework like this is that it's pretty easy. If you have like a modular piece, you can reuse it somewhere else. So a better example might be something like authentication. So you could have an authentication app, which is in charge of a specific domain, and you could reuse it in basically in any web app that you made.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. So the first, for a while, we're all of the examples are basically going to have a single app. So we'll have a project with one app. So it's. I think it can be difficult to see how you would actually divide things up in a larger scale thing. You'll do that later, but for the first couple weeks, it's just going to be kind of a single app as we introduce everything.
And so that models Python file that we're working in now, is that always just going to be used to create like tables in the database and interact with them? Is that correct?
Yeah. So this is basically going to be the representation of a table. So there are other things you can do. You can add, some functionality, and we'll see, adding validation checks and things like that. So this can be a little more complicated, but basically this is going to be, I want a student table, and here are the columns that I want it to have. And then I can make another table, which is going to be, class, teacher, and that will also inherit models.model. And that can have also, let's just say, subject dot, make it a character field, max length of 35 for whatever reason, and I'll say like is administrator, and there should be a Boolean field. So yeah, so you can keep going with this, and you can actually write functions. So like def.
I guess what I ask is that models Python file is the specific file within that app to interact with the database. That's pretty much all it's going to be used for, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
The job of the models.py is to describe the what way you want your database to look like, but in this Python code.
So it kind of looks like Django's doing the same thing we talk about with having like single use case functions where each file
Yeah.
has a single use.
Yeah. Single responsibility. Yeah. So we have.
There we go. That's the word. Thank
Yeah.
you.
So the models file will handle this, like describing the tables basically, and then views is going to handle the business logic. So you'll have def, so there you can actually do this with classes or functions, but we'll not worry about that right now. So this will be something like handle users, and it will take in a request object by default, but it'll be something like, we'll do the same thing. So we'll check if rec dot post. So if it's a post request, we'll do something. If it's a get request, we'll do something else. And then you can do whatever you want. You can actually from here, you might want to get information from the database. So you'd import. So for example, this student models, you'd import the student models here, and then you can access it. You can access it there. So we'll see all this play out. This is just a general kind of introduction.
So is models and ORM?
Yeah, yes.
All right, so the whole point of it is so we can interact with data in Python instead of doing SQL.
Yes.
Okay.
And so you can do it in Python. And so, the result will also be Python. So you can take whatever you get from the database and do Python stuff with it.
Sounds good.
Okay. So let's, okay, so we're there. Let's go back to the README. Okay, so we have this model, this student class, which is going to be a table. And anytime you make changes to your database, or you basically, which means anytime you make changes to your models, you're going to have to go through this process of migrating stuff. So there's two steps. There's the make migrations and then migrate. So Python manage.py and then make migrations, and you can specify the app, or if you don't specify it, it'll do everything. So we'll see what this does. So I'm going to minimize this, and we have this migrations folder within the attendance app, right? So it's just got this init file in it right now. I'm going to do Python manage.py make migrations, and I can specify. And what happens is I get this feedback. So it's basically, I'm kind of like informing the app that, hey, I've made some changes to my models. So I want to change my database, and I'm letting you know that I've made some changes here, and I want that to get updated and reflected in the database. So this first phase creates this, it's like an intermediary phase. And what it did is it created this 001 underscore initial, which you shouldn't really need to do anything with, but you can see that this is, so here is this, let's say maximally abstract representation of our table. And here it's a little bit lower level. It's a little bit more imperative. So here's some Python code, some more detailed Python code, which got created. And so I haven't actually changed anything in the database, but I'm prepared to do that now. And I don't want to spend too much time, but the reason you would go through this, multi-step process, which seems maybe unnecessary. One reason is this can get saved to a Git repo. So this will be part of your source code. So anytime you make changes to the database, it's tracked basically. And we can see that, so here are the two fields that I declared, email and name, but I also got ID. So if I look at my model, I didn't say anything about ID, but Django by default will create a primary key. So if you don't specify one of these other fields as a primary key, it'll just create one by default, and it'll be auto incrementing. So just like we've seen before. So the first row will be 1, the second will be 2, and so on. Okay, so we ran make migrations. It created this intermediate code, and then to actually change the database now, we'll do Python manage.py migrate. We do make migrations to prepare and then migrate. And the first one you do is there's going to be a lot of things that happen because this is the first time we've done it. All of the default apps here, all of that stuff is getting created. So some of these apps have their own tables. So those are getting created as well. So you don't need to really worry about that, but that's something you'll see. So the first one you run was going to be very busy. Okay. So now we have an actual database, and we can go into check it out. So I'll describe the database, and there's a whole bunch of stuff in here. So one thing to note that don't be too surprised by is Django has its own, it's doing a lot of stuff under the hood for you. And one of those things is our table is not actually called, even though our model is student with an uppercase S, that the table name that Django creates is attendance underscore and then this class name. So it takes the app name underscore and then the class name. You don't really need to worry about that, unless for whatever reason you're trying to use raw SQL on the database. But if you're using the Django ORM, this shouldn't matter. Okay. All right. So this next little bit, so that's basically, that's it. I mean, from the model's perspective, we have created an application and then we have our database and it's all ready to go. So now what we're going to do is take a look at some stuff, and we're going to add some data, and then we'll do some queries just so you can kind of see what it's about. And in order to do this, this is totally optional, but this is a convenience. So Django has been around for a while. There's a pretty good ecosystem around it. So there's a lot of third-party modules and libraries and stuff out there that can help you out with Django. So one of these is Django extensions. And I think the main, I'm gonna install it. You don't have to do this, but it's convenient because you can go into a shell and it will basically automatically import everything. So if you want to play around with stuff as you're developing, especially with the backend stuff, it's very tedious to try to import everything manually. So this is just, just to make your life a little easier. And so I have that installed. And I have to add it to my installed apps. So if we went to the documentation for Django extensions, we would, it would tell us to do this. So we're going to go here. We're going to add it so that our project will know about this thing. Django extensions is there. And then I'm going to run, I'm not going to install IPython, so you can do that or not if you want. We're going to, again, use the shell, python manage.py, and then shell plus. So python manage.py, shell plus. And here you can see that it's basically imported everything from our models, whereas, yeah. So like here, this is the most important thing, but as you get more complicated applications, there's lots of things. So there's a whole bunch of, you'll be using some of these for the challenge today from Django.db.models. So there's some functions that you might end up using. Okay, so now we're here in the database. And if I want to see my database, I don't do, select star from students. I do student.object. This is a little weird at first, but so there's the student, which is our class. This is our model. And then there's an objects thing on student, which is it's called a manager. So it's basically going to handle it's going to handle a lot of the interaction, but you don't actually need to do anything. Occasionally you might need to go in and override something or tweak something, but 99% of the time you don't need to do anything with this. So it's just something that is a part of, it's a part of your model, and then you can use it to execute queries and insert statements and stuff like that.
Chad,
Yeah,
this is a quick question. If we wanted to keep messing around in this shell environment, we would look up documentation for Python extension, right? To find out more about objects and all the different methods we could call. Or sorry, Django extensions. Is that what we specifically look for these type of commands?
okay, so that's a good question. So this, the Django extensions library is basically just doing this. It's just, so I go into the shell, which I can do anyway. I'm going into a Python shell, but I'm preloading everything from my app so I can like experiment with things from my actual web app. So that's all that the Django
Okay.
extensions is doing. This is just regular Django.
Just okay.
So if we look at the documentation, so making queries, let's go here. So here are 3 tables, just for example, blog, author, and entry, and you can take a look at that. So to create an object, so here it's importing this blog class, which is a table, and then to create one, you can do it. There's actually a couple ways to create things, but so one way to create it is like a row is like an instance of the class. So you create an instance of this blog class, and then you can save it. And then let me see queries. Yeah, so here's what it talks about objects. There's a whole bunch of other commands. So there's all, which is going to get everything, and then there's filter, exclude, and you can pass parameters to filter. So if you understand how
Nice.
SQL works, it's the same concepts, but the syntax is going to be Django specific.
Right. Awesome. Yeah, that helps a lot. Thank you.
Okay, so this student objects, the all is like select star from student. And what you get back is something called a query set. So a query set is basically just like a list of rows, essentially. So there are certain queries will return a query set, and other ones will just return. So if you just have a single object that you're returning, you can just return that single object. If you return more than one, or potentially more than one, it'll return a query set. So we'll just look at an example real quick. So I'm going to use another third-party module called Django Seed, and I'm just it's basically gonna create a whole bunch of fake data for me, so I don't have to create it. So it's nice for playing around with things. So I'm gonna install Django Seed. Exit. So I installed Django Seed. Okay. And then I have to add it to the installed apps and settings.py. So I'm going to do that just like I've done before. So this is an app that someone else made, but I can use it. And then to use this is, this is just the documentation here. So I'm just going to do something very quick. So I'm just going to create a bunch of, see. Okay. Seed, and then the app name I want is attendance, and then what is it, number. Okay, so I just created, actually, let me max like this 200. That might be a little too long. Let me shorten this. And I'm gonna drop this database for now. Okay, and then I'm going to rerun the migration. So I'm basically starting from scratch now. So I'm going to do Python manage.py make migrations and Python manage.py migrate. Okay, so now I've like recreated my schema for everything. And then I'm going to run that command to insert everything. Okay, so now I've got 100 fake students in here. So now I'm going to go into the shell, and because I have Django extensions installed, I'm going to use shell plus. So Python manage.py shell plus. And because everything's imported, I can just do student.objects.all. And I have a bunch of student objects. This is not very helpful though. So what can I do? What can I do to make this like a user-friendly output? I just have student object 1, student object 2. If I want to change how an object is displayed in Python.
Would the dunder string work?
Yeah. So I'm going to go into my student class right here, and I'm just going to override the string representation. So def you can do whatever you want here. I'm just going to do self.name. And then I'm going to go back in. And if we weren't using Django extensions, you have to by hand import everything, blah, blah, blah again. So that's convenient. So student. Okay. So then I have all these fake students right here. So this is a query set. You get a whole bunch of stuff. You can loop over it. So you can basically treat it like a list of rows. You can also get a specific one. So student.object.get. And if you do get, you'll specify something. So ID. We'll get the student with an ID of 2. So here's that student. And we could assign, let's say, S equals student.objects get ID equals 2. So we can see s.email, s.name over. You could even do something like s.name and if I take a look at S again, I also save it, so it will be actually saved to the database. And if I query this again, I've changed his name. So this is, it's a handy way of interacting with the database in Python. So let's take a look at some other kinds of queries we can do. So there's a filter. So let's try and filter down our results here. So student.objects.filter, and then to filter, you're going to pass some keyword arguments. Let's see. There's a whole bunch of these. So this is a little, let's see. This is a little weird, but the way this works, again, it's the same concepts, but different syntax. So pub date in this case is going to be a column name. And then you have 2 underscores. And then there are a whole bunch of basically function. So you can do greater than, less than, contains, whatever. So let me take see where these are, field lookups. Yeah, okay. So so these are called field lookups. So a lot of what we'll be doing for the challenge today is just looking through the documentation. So there's these things called field lookups, and you can read the description, but let's go ahead and use it. So filter, so I want to do, so name is the column and then double underscore, and then I know that contains is one. So it's basically like a regular expression. So contains, we'll see if there's anything that contains two L's together. So there's one result. So I can filter, let's try another filter. So there's nothing, this is an empty result set. Let's just do things with E. So there's a whole bunch of things you can do. You can actually chain them together. So we can have, if I wanted to have this filter, so things that contain E, and then also filter, let me do an email. So you get a smaller result set. And then if you can actually get all of the values, this will get everything. So you can play around with this. So this gives you, the entire row as an object. Okay, so there's a lot going on. This is the first exposure to Django, so it's probably a little overwhelming, but that's kind of a basic overview. Are there any questions right now? Okay, so the challenge for today is going to be Django Queries. If you have any issues, so when you install things, if this doesn't work, if you have a problem, let me know. I just updated one thing, so it should work, but I don't have access to everyone's system, so let me know. And what you're going to do is you're going to start the app. You're going to create a virtual environment. You're going to install everything, which includes Django. Then you're going to go into the ORM, so you'll CD into there, and then you're basically going to run tests. So let me actually let me just show you. This might be helpful to see. I'm going to stop the recording though.